I wasn't looking for answers. That's important to understand. I wasn't preparing for anything. I wasn't worried about shortages. I wasn't trying to be independent. I trusted the system the way most people do, quietly, automatically, without thinking about it too much. Food arrived when it was supposed to. The lights came on when I flipped the switch. Heat filled the room when the temperature dropped. Nothing asked anything of me anymore. And I took that as proof that everything was fine. I didn't question where things came from. I didn't wonder how long they would keep coming. That kind of thinking felt unnecessary, almost outdated. And for a long time, it worked. Section 1, quiet threat. It didn't happen during a crisis. That's the part people always expect. There were no empty shelves, no warning signs, no headlines telling us to worry. It was an ordinary moment late in the season. That quiet in-between time when the ground outside has already gone still. But winter hasn't fully arrived yet. Inside the house, everything functioned exactly as it should. Lights, heat, familiar sounds you stop noticing after years of hearing them. There was food, enough of it, wrapped, labeled, waiting. And yet, standing there, something felt thinner than it used to. Not the shelves, the margin, the space between enough and what comes next. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't fear. It was the realization that nothing in the room could replace itself. Everything present had already completed its journey, and nothing new was quietly forming in the background. I didn't name the feeling at the time. I just noticed it, the way you notice a room feels colder before the thermostat changes. Nothing was broken, but nothing was buffering the future either. And once you notice that, it's hard to stop seeing it. What unsettled me wasn't what I saw that evening. It was what I realized had already happened long before it. Nothing had been taken from us suddenly. Nothing had been interrupted. The loss occurred earlier, quietly, during a time that felt comfortable enough to ignore. It happened when replacing became easier than creating. When effort slowly lost its value because convenience kept showing up on time. At some point, without any announcement, something essential slipped out of the equation. Not food itself. Not access. The ability to recover. We stopped noticing because nothing demanded our attention. Every gap was filled before it could be felt. Every season ended with a delivery instead of a decision. That's the dangerous part. Systems don't need to collapse to make you dependent. They only need to work smoothly enough that you forget what they replaced. I remember thinking briefly that this must be how progress feels. Less work, more reliability, fewer reasons to worry. And in the moment, that belief still made sense. But what I didn't understand yet, what I couldn't see from inside that comfort, was that a single, quiet decision had already locked the outcome in place. Not made that night, not even that year. It had been made much earlier when we stopped building slack into our lives and started trusting that something else would always absorb the risk for us. I didn't know what that decision was yet. I only knew that whatever had been lost wasn't going to come back on its own. The strange thing is, this wasn't new knowledge. It just stopped being spoken out loud. I started noticing it in fragments, not lessons, not instructions, just patterns that used to repeat without explanation. Older hands moving without hesitation. Seasons treated like boundaries instead of suggestions. Habits that didn't rely on reminders or schedules. There was a time when people didn't wait to be told what came next. They recognized it. Not because they were smarter, but because they were closer to the cycle itself. My grandparents never framed these things as skills. They were just part of how a year worked. What you did before the ground went quiet. What you didn't postpone. None of it was written down. None of it was optimized. It lived in repetition, in doing the same small actions before they became urgent. And when those actions stopped being necessary, the memory didn't fight to survive. Convenience didn't erase it violently. It replaced it politely. The rhythm faded. The language disappeared. And eventually the silence felt normal. That's how the truth stays hidden. Not by being forbidden, but by becoming unnecessary long enough to be forgotten. I didn't resist any of it. That's the part that's hardest to admit. I went along because there was no reason not to. The system made things easier, and it rewarded me every time I accepted that ease without questioning it. When I stopped doing certain things myself, nothing bad happened. Time opened up. Effort dropped away. Life felt lighter. There was always a substitute. If one option disappeared, another showed up already packaged, already measured, already approved. I didn't feel like I was giving anything up. I felt like I was being freed from unnecessary work. And in a narrow sense, that was true. I trusted the reliability more than I trusted my own memory. I trusted schedules over seasons, instructions over experience. The system didn't demand loyalty. It didn't force compliance. It simply made participation comfortable. And the more comfortable it became, the less often I asked where things came from, or how long they would keep coming if something small went wrong. Nothing ever failed dramatically enough to wake me up. Normal just kept functioning, right up until it quietly stopped making sense. That's when I realized how thoroughly I had outsourced not just labor, but awareness itself. Not because I was careless, because I was normal. There was one belief I never questioned, because it had never given me a reason to. That belief was simple, that availability meant security. As long as food was present, priced, and easy to replace, everything else felt secondary. If something ran out, you adjusted. If a season ended, you compensated. The math appeared reassuring. Production scaled. Distribution improved. Efficiency increased. On paper, the system had eliminated risk. And for a long time, that belief felt true. I could see it in the numbers: yield per acre, calories per dollar, hours saved. Short-term calculations always favored replacement over continuity. Why maintain something yourself when something identical arrived on demand? Even when I noticed the dependency forming, the logic still held. The shelves were stocked. The price made sense. The calendar moved forward without interruption. That's where the conflict settled in. Because the same math that proved convenience worked in the moment also revealed how fragile it was over time. Every replacement required fuel. Every delivery required timing. Every solution assumed that tomorrow would resemble yesterday closely enough to compensate. Cumulative systems don't behave like that. They grow slowly, quietly, often inefficiently at first. But once established, they don't need permission to continue. Disposable systems do the opposite. They perform beautifully until the inputs hesitate. I remember standing there, still convinced that I was overthinking it, that this was just nostalgia disguised as concern. After all, nothing had failed. And yet, the moment I followed the numbers forward instead of sideways, the conclusion was unavoidable. Security built on constant replacement only works as long as replacement remains effortless. The belief didn't collapse all at once. It loosened, and in that space something older and far less convenient began to make sense. Once that belief loosened, the structure behind it became easier to see. Not as a conspiracy, not as malice, just design. Large systems don't optimize for resilience. They optimize for flow. They favor what can be predicted, measured, standardized. What can be replaced quickly when something breaks. What fits neatly into schedules, pallets, routes, and quarterly reports. Permanence is inefficient in that world. Longevity complicates forecasting. Self-sufficiency interrupts demand. So systems quietly reward what turns over fast and starve what lasts too long. Nothing here is personal. No one wakes up intending to weaken people. The incentives do that on their own. If something feeds you once, it's irrelevant. If it feeds you repeatedly without further input, it's a liability. Scale requires sameness. Sameness requires control. And control requires that the end user stays dependent on the next delivery. From the inside, it feels like abundance. From the outside, it looks like precision. But neither is the same as durability. The system doesn't care if you can recover on your own. It only cares that the next step arrives on time. And as long as it does, no alarms are triggered. That's what makes it so easy to mistake efficiency for safety. Right up until the moment efficiency has nothing left to lean on. I didn't go looking for an alternative. I wouldn't have known what to search for. It surfaced the way older things often do, through misuse first. through a small mistake that exposed how unprepared I was to do without replacement. I tried to shortcut it, tried to treat something cumulative as if it were disposable. And for a brief moment it almost worked. That's how I learned the difference. What I had stumbled into wasn't efficient in the modern sense. It didn't respond well to being rushed. Punished assumptions. It required time in a way the system never does. But once it was established, something shifted. The output didn't arrive all at once. It accumulated. Quietly. Season after season. One thing surprised me more than anything else. How little input it actually needed once I stopped interfering. Time became the advantage. Not speed, timing. While everything else depended on synchronized deliveries, this kept moving forward as long as the cycle remained intact. I also learned where people go wrong. Most assume it's harmless because it looks simple. They ignore the risk of misuse, contamination, timing errors, false confidence. They treat survival knowledge like a trick instead of a responsibility. That's when it fails. Not because it doesn't work, but because it refuses to compensate for impatience. What I rediscovered wasn't new. It was older than convenience, and it didn't offer comfort. It offered continuity, on the condition that I stopped trying to make it behave like everything else. That's where it leaves you, not with instructions, but with a different way of noticing what's around you. Because once you've seen the difference between something that arrives and something that continues, you can't unsee it. Tomorrow, nothing dramatic needs to change. The lights will still come on. The stores will still open. Food will still be there when you reach for it. But you might notice what isn't forming in the background anymore. What doesn't exist unless you deliberately make room for it. What won't replace itself if the rhythm slips. Remembering isn't rebellion. It's orientation. It's choosing to recognize systems that grow quietly, instead of depending on ones that reset every time something breaks. If this way of seeing feels familiar or unsettling, you're not alone. And if you want to keep following these forgotten threads, you can support the work by liking this video, sharing what you noticed in the comments, and staying connected with TDA channel. Not because you need to act immediately, but because some knowledge only stays alive when someone chooses not to forget it again. And once you start noticing, the ground doesn't look quite the same.